The chess set was already on the table when Marcus Webb walked into the common room and saw her. She was sitting alone at the far table near the window, the one nobody used because the radiator beside it knocked every 12 minutes and the noise broke concentration. She had unpacked the pieces from a worn drawstring bag, and was arranging them on a board that had seen enough use to have the notations worn off 2 of the squares. The pieces themselves were wooden, not weighted, the kind you find in the back of a closet or the bottom shelf of a thrift store, mismatched in color on one side because a replacement bishop had come from a different set. Marcus looked at the board. He looked at the girl. He looked back at the board. Then he said it loud enough for the 6 other students in the common room to hear. Scholarship pieces. He almost smiled. Nice. Zara Cole did not look up. She placed the last pawn, adjusted the king by a fraction, and looked at the position the way someone looks at something they have been looking at their whole life. Then she picked up a knight, turned it once in her fingers, and set it back down. She said nothing. Marcus stood for a moment, waiting. The 6 other students in the room held the specific silence of people who have registered a hierarchy and are deciding whether to endorse it. 3 of them half smiled. 2 looked away. 1 went back to the book in his lap. Marcus walked to his usual table, the one in the center of the room with the best light and the Whitmore Institute's official weighted tournament set on it, and sat down. He had made his assessment. He did not expect to revise it. He was wrong about Zara Cole before she touched a single piece in competition. He would spend a long time understanding how wrong. The Whitmore Institute for Strategic Excellence had operated in Fairfield, Connecticut for 22 years. Its main hall held a ranking board, a long panel of dark mahogany with individual plaques engraved with student names, ratings, and competitive records. Every student admitted to Whitmore had a plaque. The plaques were arranged by rating, highest to lowest, and the top 12 were backlit with small brass-mounted fixtures that cast a warm glow on the names they illuminated. Visitors to the institute, which included parents, donors, and occasionally journalists, noticed the board immediately upon entering. This was by design. The Whitmore curriculum included 6 hours of daily structured chess study, access to 3 grandmasters in residence for individual sessions, and a competitive calendar that ran from September through April, culminating in the Connecticut State Junior Chess Championship, which Whitmore had won 14 of the last 16 years. The institute's director was Richard Webb. He had held the position for 11 years. He had an office on the 2nd floor with a view of the practice courtyard and a wall that held photographs of every Whitmore team that had won a state championship. His name appeared on each photograph in a small caption beneath the image. He had not played competitive chess himself since his 20s, but he understood the institutional architecture of a program like Whitmore. The rankings, the access, the funding cycles, the donor relationships, with the precision of someone who had spent 11 years ensuring that the program produced the outcomes that kept all of those things in place. His son Marcus was the best player Whitmore had produced in 8 years. 16 years old, a rating of 2,287, which placed him in the national top 20 for his age group and first in the state of Connecticut. He had been offered private sessions with 2 of the grandmasters in residence since he was 13. His name was the first on the ranking board. The brass fixture behind it had been replaced once because the original burned out, and Richard Webb had noticed within 24 hours and arranged a replacement before the week was done. Whitmore's scholarship program admitted 2 students per year on full financial aid. The scholarship was competitive. Applicants submitted their rated game history and 2 letters of recommendation. The admissions committee reviewed the files. In 11 years, the scholarship program had never produced a state finalist. Zara Cole's scholarship file had been reviewed by the admissions committee in August. One committee member had flagged the absence of recent competitive games in her record. She had played in no rated tournament for 14 months. Her last rated event was a regional junior rapid tournament in Baltimore, where she had finished second. Her rating at that point was 1,847. The committee had accepted her on the strength of the game annotations she had submitted, 47 handwritten pages of analysis of her own games, written in a small, precise script with marginal notes in 2 colors of ink. The grandmaster who reviewed the annotations had written 1 line in his evaluation. This child has been taught to think about chess correctly. admit her. The committee had. The other committee members had assumed the grandmaster's enthusiasm was the specific enthusiasm of someone who had found a rough talent worth polishing. They had expected Zara Cole to need significant development before she could compete at the institute's level. They had not asked the grandmaster what he meant by correctly. If they had, he would have said something that would have changed the conversation significantly. But they had not asked, and the file had moved forward, and in September Zara Cole had arrived at Whitmore with a drawstring bag, a battered wooden set, and a rating of 1,847 that placed her 27th on the ranking board, the lowest ranked student in the institute's current enrollment. The ranking board did not lie. What it did not say was what the rating did not contain. The 14 months of unrated study, played in a single room in Baltimore with a teacher who had not registered a game since 1987 and whose name appeared in no current database, but whose understanding of the game had been formed over 6 decades of a life that chess had shaped completely and that certain systems had shaped away from the board. Zara Cole was 14 years old. The first thing you noticed was not her size, which was slight, or her age, which read young even for 14. It was her hands. They moved across a board the way a surgeon's hands move across a field, with the specific economy of someone for whom wasted motion is not a habit, not a personality trait, but a technical error. She never picked up a piece she did not intend to place. She never touched a square she had not already decided on. In the 3 weeks she had been at Whitmore, 2 of the grandmasters in residence had observed her playing in the common room without approaching her, which was unusual. Grandmasters in residence at Whitmore generally approached students whose games interested them. These 2 had watched and said nothing and left, and they had not explained this to each other or to anyone else. She wore the same dark navy hoodie most days, sleeves long enough to fall past her wrists. She carried a worn paperback, rotating titles, but always something, and she read during meals. She did not speak first in conversations. When she did speak, it was brief and accurate. She had arrived knowing no one and had made no visible effort to change this, not from coldness but from the specific self-sufficiency of someone who had spent years in a room with one other person and had organized her social needs around that arrangement. That other person was her grandfather. Joseph Cole had been a chess player since he was 9 years old. He had taught himself from a library book in 1961, in Baltimore, in a neighborhood where the chess club at the local school was not open to him. Not officially closed, just functionally unavailable, the way certain doors work in certain eras. He had played correspondence chess by mail for 40 years. He had a rating from a correspondence federation that most over-the-board players had never heard of. He had analyzed every Grandmaster game published between 1970 and 2010, in physical books, annotated in the margins in 2 colors of ink. Blue for what he understood, red for what he was still thinking about. He had taught Zara to play when she was 4 years old, at a kitchen table in a house in Baltimore, and had been her only coach and her only opponent for the 10 years that followed. He had developed an opening variation, a specific response to the Nimzo Indian that introduced a structural idea in Move 7 that most modern theory had not reached because most modern theory had been built in rooms Joseph Cole was never invited into. He had shown it to Zara at 11. He had spent 2 years explaining why it worked. She had played it in the regional rapid tournament at 13, where she had won 6 games and lost the final to a 17-year-old who had not seen the variation before and had not recovered from it until it was too late. Joseph Cole died 14 months before Zara arrived at Whitmore. Cardiac arrest, in the kitchen, on a Tuesday morning in July, while Zara was still asleep. She had found him. She had not played in a rated game since. She had done other things. She had sat at the kitchen table with his annotated books and read every red ink marginal note, all the things he had been still thinking about, and worked them out. She had played herself, running games to their conclusions, restarting, varying. She had filled 2 notebooks with her own analysis, in blue and red ink, the same colors his had used, not as a tribute but because the system had worked and she saw no reason to change it. She had applied to Whitmore because he had told her to, 2 years before he died, on a Tuesday evening when they had been going over an endgame for the 3rd consecutive hour and she had found a line he had not found, and he had sat back and looked at her across the board and said, "You're going to need better competition than me. There is a school in Connecticut." He had looked up the application requirements. He had written down the deadline on the back of an envelope and put it in the kitchen drawer. After he died, she found the envelope. She had submitted the application in February. She had arrived at Whitmore with a rating of 1,847 and 47 pages of handwritten analysis, and her grandfather's battered wooden set and the understanding, carried without display, that she was the most prepared player in the building. Not the most highly rated. Not the most decorated. The most prepared. There is a difference, and at 14 she had been taught it clearly. Marcus Webb had been at Whitmore since he was 11. He knew the institute the way people know a place they have shaped and been shaped by simultaneously, through the specific intimacy of someone for whom the building's rhythms are indistinguishable from their own. He knew which practice rooms had the best light and which had the draft that made long sessions uncomfortable. He knew which grandmaster gave the most useful individual sessions and which gave the most flattering ones. He moved through the institute with the ease of someone whose name was on the board first, and who had not yet been given a reason to doubt that this arrangement would hold. He was genuinely talented. The narrator is careful about this because the alternative, a lesser antagonist, would not serve the story. Marcus Webb was a real chess player. His 2,287 rating was the result of real work, real hours, real study. The grandmaster who worked with him regularly had told Richard Webb in a private conversation that Marcus had the positional instincts of a player who would be looking at 2,400 before he was 18. This was not flattery. It was an assessment. What Marcus had not been required to do, in 5 years at Whitmore, was encounter a player who came from outside the category of players he had been trained to understand. His competitive experience was broad within a specific geography: Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, the regional and national junior circuits. All of those circuits ran through the same institutional channels, the same coaching networks, the same opening theory, the same preparation systems. He had never sat across the board from someone who had been built in a room that none of those channels touched. The state junior championship was held on the first Saturday of November, at a hotel conference center in Hartford. 12 players from 8 schools, round-robin format through the morning. Top 4 advancing to single elimination semifinals in the afternoon, final at 4 o'clock. Whitmore sent 3 players. Marcus Webb, seeded first. A 15-year-old named Daniel, seeded 4th. And Zara Cole, unseeded, entered as the scholarship student with the lowest rating in the field. The tournament director looked at the entry list on Friday evening when the registrations finalized. He saw Zara's rating. He had been running this championship for 9 years. He sent a brief email to Richard Webb asking whether Whitmore's third entry had been intended or was an administrative error. Richard Webb replied that the entry was correct and that the institute was committed to providing full competitive experience for all enrolled students. He had not consulted Zara. He had not consulted the admissions grandmaster. He had looked at the rating and reached a conclusion about the value of the entry, and his email had been the diplomatic version of that conclusion. Zara's first 4 round-robin games on Saturday morning lasted a combined 93 minutes. She won all 4. Her opponents in rounds 1 and 2 had not understood what was happening until it was over. Her opponent in round 3, a 16-year-old from a Hartford private school with a rating of 2,041, had understood exactly what was happening and had not been able to stop it. He shook her hand afterward and said nothing for a moment and then said, "What was that in move 7? Zara said, "My grandfather's line." The Hartford player nodded as though this explained something, which it did, though not in the way he meant. Round 4 was against Daniel from Whitmore. Daniel was a careful, thorough player whose preparation was excellent and whose execution was reliable. The game lasted 41 moves. Zara won on the queen side with a rook maneuver that Daniel had not anticipated because the setup for it had begun on move 12 and he had not read it as a threat until move 36, which was 5 moves too late. After the round robin, the top 4 were posted. Zara Cole was seeded second. Marcus Webb was seeded first. The semi-final pairings placed them on opposite sides of the bracket. Marcus won his semi-final in 32 moves against the Hartford player who had asked Zara about the line in round 3. The Hartford player was still thinking about move 7 when Marcus closed the game on move 32, and he did not have enough left in his concentration to respond correctly. Zara won her semi-final against the fourth seed, a player from a New Haven program, in 51 moves that were technical and precise and never particularly dramatic. She played them without expression. At 4 in the afternoon, Zara Cole and Marcus Webb sat down across from each other in the final round of the Connecticut State Junior Chess Championship. There were 40 people in the room. 12 of them were parents. 7 were coaches or accompanying adults from the competing schools. Richard Webb was in the third row, program in his lap, pen uncapped. A journalist from a chess culture website had come to write about Marcus Webb's expected third consecutive state title and was sitting against the wall with a laptop open. 2 of the Whitmore grandmasters in residence were in the back row. Neither of them had been asked to attend. They had come independently and sat separately and had not acknowledged each other's presence, which was unusual because they usually sat together at events. Marcus was white. He played 1.d4. The standard opening. His preparation was deep on the d4 lines, refined through 2 years of sessions with his grandmaster. He knew the theory to move 30 in most of the responses. He played 1.d4 with the confidence of someone who has prepared an answer to every question the position can ask. Zara played the Nimzo-Indian. 1, nf6, 2, e6, 3, bb4. Standard. Expected. Marcus had played against the Nimzo-Indian 40 times in rated competition. He knew it the way you know a conversation you have had many times before. Then move 7. She played 7, nc6, developing the knight to a square that the standard theory did not bring it to until move 11 or 12, and in a specific pawn configuration that the knight's presence on c6 in this move order created a structural pressure on the d4 pawn that was not immediately visible but was severe. It was not a novelty in the academic sense. It had not been published, not because it was wrong, but because the person who had found it had been writing in the margins of his own books in a room that academic chess theory never visited. Marcus looked at the board. He looked at it for 43 seconds, which was a long time in the context of a championship final with a 40-move time control. He was not panicking. He was doing what a good player does when they encounter something unfamiliar. He was trying to understand it. The problem was that understanding it required seeing what the position would look like in 8 moves. And in 8 moves the d4 pawn would be under structural pressure from 3 directions simultaneously in a way that his preparation had not equipped him for because his preparation had not been built to account for this move order. He made a decision. He played 8.bd2, the most natural developing move, consolidating his center. It was not wrong. It was the move a strong player makes when they are not certain and want to keep the position solid. It was also exactly what the position was waiting for, because 8.bd2 allowed Zara to play 8d5, locking the pawn structure into a configuration that the d4 pawn would now be unable to escape for the next 20 moves. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet around chess, the specific quality of people watching something whose importance they understand without being able to fully articulate it. The journalist against the wall had stopped typing. Richard Webb had uncapped his pen and not used it. In the back row, one of the grandmasters leaned very slightly forward. The game lasted 67 moves. In the chess sense, it was not close. Zara had a positional advantage from move 15 that grew with the precision of something that had been designed rather than found. Marcus played accurately. He made no blunders. He found the best defensive moves available and played them correctly. The position simply did not offer him enough. The structural idea in the opening had constrained his pieces into a geometry that did not have a good solution, and Zara had built that geometry from move 7 and had been managing its execution since then with the patience of someone who had been taught by a man who had annotated games in red ink for decades and left nothing to impulse. At move 67, Marcus looked at the board for 90 seconds. Then he extended his hand. Zara shook it. She did not look at the room. She did not look at Richard Webb. She looked at the board for a moment, not in satisfaction, in the specific way of someone reviewing a piece of work to confirm it is done. And then she gathered the pieces back into the drawstring bag, the mismatched bishop last, and set the bag on the floor beside her chair. The room did not react immediately. 4 seconds of silence. The specific pause that falls when a result has been reached that revises the room's understanding of what it was watching. Then the applause came. In the third row, Richard Webb did not applaud immediately. He sat with the uncapped pen in his hand and looked at the board and then at the girl at the other end of the table. His expression was not simple, and he did not try to make it simple. He had sent an email the previous evening suggesting the entry might be an administrative error. He was a precise man. He understood precisely what that meant now. Marcus Webb sat across from Zara for a moment after the applause started. He looked at the board. He was 16 years old and he had just lost a championship final to a 14-year-old in 67 moves, and he had not made a mistake. That was the part he needed to sit with. He had played correctly and it had not been enough, which meant something about the gap between his preparation and hers that was not comfortable to understand. He looked at Zara. "Move 7, he said. "Where does that come from?" "My grandfather," Zara said. "Is he a grandmaster?" "No," she said. "He was never rated. He didn't play in tournaments." She was quiet for a moment. "He couldn't, when he was young. Later he didn't want to." She looked at the board. "He just studied." Marcus was quiet. "For how long?" he asked. 60 years, Zara said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Can I see the line?" Marcus said. "From the beginning. Can you walk me through it?" Zara looked at him. She looked at him the way her grandfather had looked at the red ink questions in his margins, with the steady attention of someone assessing whether the question deserves the answer. Then she reached into the drawstring bag and took out the battered wooden set and placed it on the table between them and began setting up the position from move 1. The grandmaster, who had been leaning forward in the back row, stood up and walked to the table and sat down in the chair beside Zara without asking and looked at the position. The second grandmaster followed 30 seconds later. Richard Webb walked to the table and stood behind his son and watched. The journalist against the wall had closed the laptop and taken out a notebook. Zara replayed the game from move 7. She did not narrate while she played. She placed the pieces and let the position speak. When she reached move 15, the grandmaster on her left made a small sound. Not a word, a sound, the specific involuntary sound of a person who has understood something they had not expected to understand. He did not say what it was. He looked at the board. "Who taught you this?" he said. "My grandfather," Zara said. "Joseph Cole." The grandmaster was quiet. Then he said, "Joseph Cole in Baltimore." Zara looked at him. "Yes." "The correspondence player," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." The grandmaster looked at the board. He was 71 years old and had been playing chess seriously since he was 9, and he had encountered, across 60 years of the game, perhaps 4 or 5 positions that had surprised him in the specific way this one surprised him. He set the knight back on c6 and looked at the structural pressure on d4, and he was quiet for a long time. "I knew of him," he said finally. "I had seen some of his correspondence games. Years ago. Someone sent them to me." He looked at Zara. "I didn't know he had a student." "He didn't," Zara said. "He had a granddaughter." The grandmaster nodded once. He looked at the board again. Then he said very quietly, not performing the statement but placing it, "He was better than his rating. Much better." A pause. "He should have been in these rooms." Zara looked at the board. "I know," she said. "He isn't." "No." Neither of them spoke for a moment. The room around them was still in the specific way of people who have understood that they are overhearing something that is not performing itself for them. "You are," the grandmaster said. He said it the way her grandfather had said things he meant completely, without decoration, without the warmth that wants credit for being warm. "As a fact. The most important kind." Zara did not respond immediately. She reached into the front pocket of the drawstring bag. She took out a small photograph, wallet-sized, worn at its corners, the lamination bubbling slightly at one edge. An old man at a kitchen table, a chessboard in front of him, both hands on the table, not touching any pieces, looking at the board with the specific stillness of someone reading something they have read many times and are still finding new things in. She held it for a moment. Then she set it on the table beside the board. "Not for the room." Not for the grandmaster. She set it down the way you set something down when you want the moment to include a person who is not present. The things that followed moved at the speeds appropriate to what they were. The journalist's piece ran the following Thursday, in the chess culture publication where she had been assigned to write about Marcus Webb's expected third title. The piece was titled differently than she had planned. It described the opening variation in sufficient technical detail that 3 grandmasters had commented on it in the publication's forum within 72 hours of posting. One of them had said, in a comment that was shared significantly beyond the forum, "This is a structural idea that should be in the theory. The fact that it isn't is a function of who was in the rooms where theory was built and who wasn't. That fact is not neutral." The comment was on the record. It would be there next year. Things entered into the record stay. Whitmore's Grandmaster-in-Residence submitted a formal request to the Federation to have Joseph Cole's correspondence games archived in the annotated game database that served as the primary resource for theory development. The request required documentation of the games, which Zora had in the form of her grandfather's records. 40 years of handwritten notation in those same books, stored in boxes in her mother's house in Baltimore. The documentation process would take time. Several months, possibly more. It would happen. Richard Webb updated the ranking board in the Whitmore main hall on the Monday following the championship. Zora Cole's plaque moved. It moved to the top. The brass fixture was installed behind it by Tuesday morning. Richard Webb had arranged the installation before the week was done. He had not consulted anyone about the timing. He had simply understood what was accurate and updated the record accordingly. He sat in his office on Tuesday afternoon and looked at the photograph on his wall. The championship teams, his name in the caption beneath each one, and he thought about an email he had sent on a Friday evening suggesting that a scholarship student's entry in a state championship might be an administrative error. He thought about it with the specific attention of a man who is precise about things and has found an imprecision in himself that he does not yet know what to do with. This story does not tell you what he did with it. Only that he sat with it, and that sitting with it is different from looking away. Marcus Webb was in the common room on Thursday evening. The center table with the good light and the weighted tournament set. He was going over the game from the championship, move by move, from the opening, with a board and his analysis notebook. He had been doing this for 3 days. He had reached move 7 40 times and looked at the knight on c6 40 times and understood it slightly better each time and not yet completely. Zora came into the common room at 8 o'clock. She set her drawstring bag on the far table near the radiator. She took out the battered wooden set and began arranging the pieces. Marcus looked across the room. "Cole," he said. She looked at him. "The line," he said. "From move 7. Will you go through it again?" She looked at him the way her grandfather had looked at red ink questions, assessing. Then she picked up the drawstring bag and walked to the center table and sat down across from him and set up the pieces. She did not set up the starting position. She set up the position from move 7. The knight went to c6. She placed it and looked at him. "You're asking the wrong question," she said. "You're looking at the knight. Don't look at the knight." Marcus looked at the board. "Then what am I looking at?" "The d4 pawn," she said. "Look at everything that can attack it in 8 moves if you play naturally. Count them." Marcus counted. He counted slowly. His expression changed on the 3rd count and then again on the 4th. "He found this," Marcus said. "Your grandfather." "Yes. And he never played it in a rated game." "No. Because he couldn't get into the tournaments." "When he was young," Zora said. "Later he didn't want to. He said the board knew what he'd figured out regardless of whether there was a rating attached to it." Marcus looked at the knight on c6. "That's," he started. "I know," she said. She moved the d4 pawn to show him the pressure. Then she moved it back. Then she walked him through move 8 and 9 and 10 and the structural geometry that those moves created, the way her grandfather had walked her through it at 11 years old at a kitchen table in Baltimore. The same explanation, the same patient progression, the same understanding that the point of teaching a thing correctly is not that the student performs it but that they carry it. Marcus followed it. He asked questions that were real questions, the kind that arrive when someone is actually trying to understand rather than arrive at a conclusion. She answered them with the brevity her grandfather had used, which was the brevity of someone who believes that a precise answer is more respectful than a long one. At 9:47, the common room's overhead light flickered twice. The signal that lights out was in 30 minutes. Marcus looked up from the board. "Again tomorrow," he said. "If you want," Zara said. She began packing the pieces into the drawstring bag. The mismatched bishop last. She stood and picked up the bag and the paperback she'd left on the edge of the table. She walked toward the door. At the door she stopped. Not because she had forgotten anything. Because something was better said from a doorway. "He spent 60 years building something," she said, not turning around. "In a room nobody came to." A pause. "I'm here." So it got out. She turned then and looked at Marcus across the common room, across the weighted tournament set on the center table, across the board that still held the position from move 7. "That's how it works," she said. "That's always how it works." She walked out. The board held the position in the empty room. The knight on c6. The d4 pawn with its 4 invisible attackers lined up in the moves ahead. A position that had been developed in a kitchen in Baltimore over 60 years by a man who had been told, in the language of closed doors and administrative redirections, that his understanding of the game did not qualify for the rooms where the game was recorded. The position sat on the board under the overhead light and was exactly as true as it had always been. In the morning, the ranking board in the main hall held Zara Cole's name at the top, the brass fixture warm behind it. Students passed it on the way to breakfast. Most of them glanced at it. 2 of them stopped and looked for a longer moment. Nobody announced anything. Nobody made a speech. The board said what it said permanently, in the way that boards built for that purpose say things, without inflection, without apology, accurate. Zara went to breakfast alone, as she always did. She had the paperback open against her tray. She read while she ate. Somewhere in the middle of the meal a student sat down across from her, a girl she had spoken to twice before, in passing. The girl did not say anything for a minute. Then she said, "Can I watch when you play Marcus again?" Zara looked up from the book. "Yes," she said. She went back to reading. 3 weeks later, a Tuesday, Zara was walking through the Whitmore main hall between sessions, paperback under her arm, drawstring bag over her shoulder. A younger student, a 12-year-old new arrival, one of the institute's early entry scholars, came around a corner carrying a board and a set and dropped everything. Pieces scattered across the tile floor, rolling under the bench along the wall, spinning to rest in corners. The kid crouched and started collecting them. Zara crouched with him. She gathered the scattered pieces, pawns first, the bishop, the queen that had rolled the farthest, and handed them back to him one at a time. "Careful," she said. The kid clutched the pieces to his chest. He watched her go. People had called her grandfather a student of the game. Not because of a title on a wall, but because of the way he had spent his life, reading, annotating, thinking, building an understanding that no closed door could reduce because the understanding lived in him, not in the institutions that would have preferred to hold it for safekeeping. He had never told anyone he was building something. He had simply built it. For 60 years. For whoever came next. Zara Cole never told anyone she was carrying it. She didn't have to. The board already knew. If this story reached you today, in whatever room you have been told your preparation doesn't qualify for, subscribe to Noir Resurgence. Like this video. Leave one word in the comments that describes Joseph Cole. Just one. We read every single one. See you at the next one.